You're listening to Beyond the Couch podcast with Dr. Sally Nazari, where we look at you beyond the couch and build ways to enrich your life, share your triumphs, achieve your goals, and most importantly, where we'll be celebrating you. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Couch. I'm your host, licensed psychologist, Dr. Sally Nazari, and I'm really looking forward to today's topic, sleep. We all do this every day, and it's a factor in so many parts of our life, yet we often overlook how this is going for us. But when it's not going well, it can really be a tough obstacle. A question often on people's mind is, how much sleep do I need each night? Generally speaking, there's no single amount of sleep that fits everyone, but most healthy adults need 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. However, at the extremes, some people need only 4 hours of sleep and others require 10 hours of sleep. Moreover, a person's sleep need might change depending upon life circumstances. At this point, it's important to remember that optimal amount of sleep lets us not only feel alert and energetic during the day, but it also allows us to best manage our emotions and reactions to the difficult things going on for us in our lives. It gives us a resilience that helps us navigate the tough things that come up, deal with our stresses, and figure out things we're struggling to work through. It can also just brighten our spirits and give us relief and positivity during a difficult period of time. Now, insomnia is diagnosed when poor sleep is associated with distress or daytime consequences, such as difficulty functioning or a tough mood that we can't seem to shake. Insomnia tends to begin during periods of stress. In fact, about 75% of people with insomnia can identify a trigger that initiated their insomnia. Examples of some of these triggers include health issues or stress related to family or work situations. While poor sleep is a common reaction to stress, there are large individual differences in how people react to and cope with stress. These differences likely play a role in the development of insomnia. Most of the time, sleep normalizes after the stress that started it subsides or after a medical condition that may have caused it is treated. However, in some cases, insomnia does persist. This can happen if there are perpetuating mechanisms present, and I'll go through a couple examples. The first example is that the bed and the bedroom can become linked with wakefulness, with arousal, or even just negative emotions. This is known as conditioned arousal or conditioned insomnia. The bed and bedroom become unconscious cues for arousal rather than for sleep. For example, many people with insomnia report that they doze off while watching TV or reading in the living room, only to become fully awake when they go to bed. For these people, past experience with tossing and turning while trying to sleep has made the bed a cue for wakefulness rather than for sleep. Conditioned arousal can develop even when the main problem is prolonged awakenings in the middle of the night rather than difficulty in initially falling asleep. Another example of a perpetuating mechanism is that some people react to poor sleep by trying harder. They extend the time they spend in bed, avoid previously enjoyed activities that they do in the evening, and end up spending long periods of time tossing and turning in bed. These strategies don't solve the problem. In fact, they often make it worse. Prolonged time in bed actually promotes wakefulness. The very act of trying to sleep produces frustration, increases arousal, and can become another source of stress. In addition, we're now training ourselves to respond to the cues of the bed and the bedroom with wakefulness. A third example of a perpetuating mechanism that can keep insomnia persisting is worrying. Worry about sleep is another common reaction to having difficulty sleeping, particularly in those of us who are predisposed to worry. After a period of not sleeping well, apprehension and concern that the coming night will be just another struggle begins to emerge. And when we're unable to sleep, worries about the negative daytime consequences of not enough sleep develop, and we start to plan our day and evening activities around our sleep. These kinds of worries, though understandable, tend to mentally activate us and end up making sleep even more difficult to achieve. Unfortunately, many of the things people with insomnia do end up making their problems worse. For example, we may go to bed too early or sleep in following a poor night's sleep in order to recover lost sleep. Although these practices seem logical and sensible for good sleepers who are occasionally forced to curtail their sleep a bit, these same practices often serve to continue or worsen the sleep problems of people with ongoing insomnia. In fact, these habits are usually the opposite of what needs to be done to improve sleep. We'll talk a bit more about that in just a few minutes. Now, it's also important to keep in mind that sometimes people misjudge their state of sleepiness. We tend to confuse the sense of being sleepy with the sense of being tired, fatigued, and the wish to rest the mind and body. Being very sleepy means having to almost struggle to stay awake. When you're close to that, you're sleepy. Fatigue and tiredness reflect low energy that signals the need to rest, whereas sleepiness signals the need and readiness for sleep. Sleep scientists have yet to agree on the fundamental biological purpose of sleep. Some sleep experts believe that during the sleep cycle, the human body restores and repairs cells and tissues that have been damaged or destroyed while we're awake. Other experts think that sleep is necessary to maintain a constant body temperature, and still others believe that sleep is essential to the maintenance of normal human metabolism. Regardless of these different opinions, sleep experts generally agree that to function best, we all require consistent, good quality sleep. It's also important to remember, as we said a couple of minutes ago, that the right amount of sleep will vary from person to person. Moreover, the sleep need of each person may vary depending upon life circumstances and age. So let's delve a little bit further into why we need sleep. In fact, this is an important area for us to focus on because many people exacerbate their sleep problems just because we don't tend to have a good understanding of the sleep process. Sleep, like oxygen, food, and water, is one of our basic daily needs. Like hunger and thirst, it's a drive. Our body will eventually, when faced with no other options, force us to sleep. Sleep loss increases the sleep drive and promotes good sleep. Much like when we're very hungry, we find ourselves more likely to eat or even eating more voraciously. You might have noticed that you occasionally had a relatively good night's sleep after one or several nights of poor sleep. This kind of pattern demonstrates the sleep drive in action, a natural accumulation of sleep need that occurs as we go through the day plays a part in the regulation of normal sleep. In other words, under normal conditions, sleep debt or sleep loss fuels or drives good sleep at night. Indeed, the drive to sleep gets stronger the longer one is awake before attempting to sleep. For instance, a person is much more likely to sleep for a long time after being awake for 16 hours in a row than after being awake for only 2 hours. Most persons who have sleep problems tend to be focused on the negative consequences of insufficient sleep and forget that some sleep debt promotes a healthy appetite for sleep. So our attempts to recover lost sleep by trying to sleep more the next night or taking long naps during the day weaken the sleep drive and prolong our sleep difficulties. I'll elaborate on this in just a few moments. Although science still has much to learn about the biological purpose of sleep, we already know a great deal about the human sleep process. In fact, many research studies have shown that sleep is an active process made up of two distinct states: rapid eye movement, or REM sleep, and non-REM sleep. Non-rapid eye movement, or non-REM sleep, occupies about 75 to 80% of the night's sleep of a typical healthy adult. The rest of the night's sleep is REM sleep. Now, it's important to remember that non-REM sleep consists of several stages marked by their special brain-body activity patterns. And these stages are divided into threes going from the lightest to the deepest stages. During a typical night of sleep, the non-REM and REM stages of sleep occur in consistent and predictable cycles. When good sleepers go to sleep at night, they usually experience a period of a relaxed wakefulness. The length of this period varies from one person to the next, but it's typically less than 30 minutes. About 70 to 90 minutes into the night, the first REM sleep occurs. Usually, this first REM period is relatively short and is followed by a return to a lighter stage of sleep. The time from sleep onset to the end of the first REM period constitutes the first sleep cycle, and for the rest of the night, REM sleep alternates with non-REM sleep in roughly 90-minute cycles. Now, it's important to keep in mind that most deep sleep occurs early in the sleep period. Because most people sleep at least 3 hours, they're rarely deprived of this deep sleep stage. Some wakefulness is a normal part of the night's sleep, even in good sleepers, and a few brief awakenings do not need to be a cause for concern. These awakenings become more frequent closer to an individual's morning wake time. And this explains why most people are more easily awakened in the later part of the nocturnal sleep period. And what this also means is that even when you sleep poorly, you're unlikely to be totally deprived of the deepest, most restorative stage of sleep. REM periods become longer toward the morning rising time. This is also why we're more likely to wake from a dream during the second half of the night. As the night progresses, our dreams may become more complex and/or vivid, explaining why nightmares are more common during the last third of the sleep period. So now we have a good understanding of how the sleep process works. Let's look at the two basic processes that regulate sleep and wakefulness. One is the normal accumulation of sleep debt as the day goes on, which we mentioned a few minutes ago. In other words, the more time that passes after we wake up for the day, the greater the sleep debt. This is what we refer to as the sleep drive. The other process is determined by our biological clock. It's called the circadian process. Our sleep drive is lowest in the morning when we wake up. It gradually increases as the day progresses. During sleep, our sleep drive gradually weakens as we recharge our energy reserve. Napping, which is actually sleeping, also reduces our sleep drive. The longer we nap, the more our sleep drive is reduced. Napping close to bedtime, even the brief dozing off while watching TV, weakens our sleep drive just when we need it the most. In some ways, the sleep drive is similar to hunger, and napping is like snacking. As Grandma used to say, snacking close to mealtime may ruin our appetite. The same can be said for napping before sleep or close to bedtime. People, like most animals, have powerful internal clocks that affect their behavior and bodily functioning, including digestion, body temperature, and sleep-wake pattern. Many of these clocks work across roughly 24-hour periods. For example, if we record a person's internal body temperature for several days under the same conditions, we will see a consistent up and down pattern across each 24-hour day. Most people's internal temperature will reach its lowest point around 3 or 4 a.m., will rise through the morning and early afternoon, and will hit its peak or highest point around 9 or 10 p.m. Then their temperature will begin to fall until it hits its low point in the early morning hours, after which it starts rising once again. Now, we tend to fall asleep as our core body temperature is falling and wake up in the morning after our core body temperature starts rising. We sleep best when our sleep drive is strong and our bedtimes and wake times are in sync with the internal biological clock that regulates our sleep and wakefulness. One way to understand how our biological clock regulates sleep is to realize that this clock operates by sending alerting or waking signals that differ in strength across the 24-hour day, and that these alerting signals oppose our sleep drive. You can think of the temperature as an indication of how strong the alerting signal is. In other words, a higher temperature indicates a higher alerting signal, and a lower temperature indicates a weaker alerting signal. Under normal conditions, if there are no sleep problems, the alerting signals sent by our clocks increase from the time we wake up in the morning until a time in the evening when our alerting signals start decreasing. As our sleep drive increases and promotes sleepiness, the alerting signals from our clock ensure that we don't fall asleep during the day when we need to be alert to carry out our daily activities. The ideal time to fall asleep is when our alerting signal starts to decrease in the evening and our sleep drive is high. Said in other words, at a time when the balance between our sleep-promoting and alertness-promoting drives is tipped towards sleep. Then, after we fall asleep, our alerting signal continues to decrease, which is a good thing because at the same time our sleep drive weakens as well. In that way, the net effect of the sleep-promoting and opposing factors continues to be in favor of sleep so that we continue to sleep. Then, sometime in the early hours of the night, the alerting signals from our internal clock start to increase yet again, and about 1 to 3 hours after that, we naturally wake up for the day. So, how do we make sense of all this? Let's look at how we can keep our biological clock healthy. Keeping a very irregular sleep-wake schedule can interfere with our ability to sleep well because it weakens the signals from our circadian clock. Irregular sleep schedules subject our bodies to a frequent jet lag-like experience during which we try to sleep out of sync with our biology. To keep your biological clock healthy, it's particularly important to keep regular wake and out of bed times. These regular wake and out of bed times mean the clock is getting light signals at the same time every day. This is important because the clock uses light signals to reset itself every day. Therefore, regular wake and out of bed times and regular exposure to natural light help keep the clock ticking with a strong and regular beat, which supports good sleep. So, what do we do when the biological clock is out of sync? Sometimes, a person's biological clock is out of sync with society's typical daily schedule. People who describe themselves as night owls may have a delayed circadian clock relative to most other people. This means that the night owl's alerting signal starts decreasing later than it does for most people. If night people or night owls go to bed when most other people do, they're trying to sleep when their alerting signal is still too strong. Therefore, they have difficulty falling asleep. But if they wait and go to bed later, they fall asleep much faster because their clock's alerting signals are already weakening. Night people often have difficulty waking up in the morning. This happens because when they try to wake up during the normal societal times, their biological clocks are not yet generating strong enough alerting signals. And there are also individuals who have clocks that run early. These people typically describe themselves as definitely a morning person. Now, one thing to keep in mind, compared with young adults, older people tend to wake more often during the night and wake too early in the morning without having enough sleep to feel rested. As many as 50% of older individuals complain about sleep problems, including disturbed or light sleep, frequent awakenings, and early morning awakenings. Indeed, the percent of the deepest sleep stage relative to total sleep time declines with age. Older age may be associated with a weaker signal from the circadian clock that's due, in part, to insufficient light reaching the brain's clock. Insufficient light signal to the brain may be related to a decrease in time spent outdoors or age-related changes in light receptors in the eye. But because light exposure is an important regulator of the circadian clock, age-associated reduction in light exposure results in a weaker signal from the circadian clock. In addition to that, some older adults go to bed and wake up earlier than when they were younger. This is a shift that's influenced by both biology and lifestyle. So we just discussed some of what we know about the science of sleep and wake regulation. Now let's discuss several factors that can leave an impact on sleep. Suggestions for modifying the amounts and timing of these things are part of what's called sleep hygiene, which we'll explore in more depth next week when we take a closer look at some sleep solutions. For many, alcoholic beverages tend to be relaxing and induce drowsiness. However, later in the night, as alcohol is metabolized, it leads to restless and disturbed sleep. The result is a far less refreshing sleep. Therefore, drinking alcohol close to bedtime is generally discouraged. Caffeine is a relatively long-acting stimulant whose effects may last for several hours after being consumed. People differ greatly in the rate at which caffeine affects them and, as a result, in the length of time during which it might impact their sleep. On average, 4 to 5 hours after a modest amount of caffeine has been consumed, about half the amount of caffeine continues to act as a stimulant in our brains. This activity may last even longer after higher levels of intake and in individuals who are particularly sensitive to its effects, including older adults. We therefore recommend limiting consumption of caffeinated beverages to the equivalent of no more than 3 8-ounce cups daily and avoiding consumption after lunch. Again, keep in mind that individual needs may vary. Cravings for nicotine can occur during the middle of the night because nicotine has a short half-life of approximately 2 hours and therefore leaves the body fairly quickly. As the body breaks down nicotine, a person experiences withdrawal symptoms such as agitation and tension. This leads to the consumption of more nicotine in order to reduce these symptoms. So, in other words, each dose of nicotine relaxes the tension and agitation that were produced by withdrawal from the previous nicotine consumption. This means rather than relaxing tension from everyday stresses, nicotine only treats the tension and agitation that resulted from withdrawal by the previous intake. Because of this, if you smoke, it's best to avoid smoking at least 2 hours before bedtime. Exercise too close to bedtime may have a negative impact on sleep. This is associated with the fact that exercise is activating. It raises our core body temperature and therefore may interfere with the daily drop in temperature before bedtime that supports sleep. Because of this, exercise should be avoided about 4 hours before bedtime. Now, remember, gentle stretching exercises before bedtime are okay and may, in fact, be relaxing and possibly even supportive of sleep. In the same vein, a heavy meal close to bedtime may lead to indigestion and sometimes reflux during the night, both of which may cause arousal in our physiology. The process of falling asleep slows down the digestive system. Because of this, going to bed before food is fully digested is a poor sleep practice, and eating a heavy meal should be avoided about 4 hours before bedtime. But because feeling hungry may also interfere with sleep, a light snack can be okay. Eating in the middle of the night is also not a good idea because it sends alerting signals to our brain and can prolong the time you're awake. It also trains the body to need food in the middle of the night rather than sleep. Now, we've spent some time looking at how sleep works for us and why it's important to support our best sleep on a regular basis. We've also started taking a look at how some things in our day-to-day lives can get in the way of us getting some good, quality, restful sleep. Next time, we'll go through some best practices for promoting our best sleep so that we can wake up feeling refreshed, energized, calm, and ready to celebrate our life every day. Between now and then, take a look at the show notes for a recent Reader's Digest article where I share some tips on how cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, has been helping many people with insomnia. And get ready for our interview episodes coming up in just a few weeks. Until then, take care.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Couch podcast, a space for celebrating you. The contents of this episode are for informational and supplemental purposes only, and not a substitute for professional services. For more access to you beyond the couch, check out www.drsallynazari.com.